Hello, and welcome to this high-level panel discussion where multilateral development banks, or MDBs as we say, and some of our direct stakeholders will be taking a look at the way we work together. And delivering impact together is the theme of this EBRD annual meeting and business forum, as I'm sure you all know. It very much resonates with the to-do list of each of the MDBs. And I think together we are a global force for good, with ambitious mandates and great transformative potential, sharing similar strategies to address urgent development challenges. But how effectively do we work together, and where could we be doing better? So my name is Richard Porter. I'm the Managing Director of Communications at the EBRD. And before I introduce my distinguished panel here, there's a very short video we'll play to set the scene. So that's the plan that was discussed by leaders of MDBs in Washington recently, and we're going to be talking about that this morning. And let me just take you through the list of speakers we've got. Probably most of them you'll recognise. But we have Odile Renaud-Basso, the president of the EBRD. Maybe I should say the newly re-elected president of the EBRD. Congratulations. Axel von Trotsenburg, World Bank Senior Managing Director. Bhargav Dasgupta, Vice President of the Asian Development Bank with particular responsibility for private sector operations. Thomas Östros, European Investment Bank Vice President and an EBRD Governor. Another EBRD Governor, Rania Mashat, Minister of International Cooperation from Egypt. And then Alexia Latortue, Assistant Secretary for International Trade and Development for the US Treasury. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. So we've got about an hour, and we'll get started. And I'm going to start with you, Odile. You said in your speech last night at the opening ceremony that this is the time for us to stick together. And I don't think you were necessarily thinking of MDBs in that context, but do we take it that you will be prioritising cooperation and partnership with your MDB partners for your second term?
Yes, thank you, Richard. And indeed, I think just only the fact that in an EBRD annual meeting we have a panel on MDB cooperation with high-level panelists coming from all over the world, Washington, Manila, Luxembourg, Cairo, and Washington. And to discuss that, I think this only is a sign, and that for me it's a very important priority, and I believe it's not for me only. I'm really very impressed of the new dynamic we have among MDB's leaders about cooperation, and it was a theme which is not completely new. I remember Tarman report in 2017 or about MDB as a system and so forth, but I think that the level of ambition and the commitment to cooperation is much bigger. It's probably related to personal factors, people more committed than individual, the chemistry, but also I think it's very much related to the fact that the awareness that the challenges are bigger, we are lagging behind in terms of SDG delivery, the public money is scarce and the resources are scarce. And if we want to be able, if we want to have a chance to reach the SDGs, if we want to see impact on the green transition, climate action level, where we also see the challenges accelerating and the real impact of climate change already taking a huge toll on our countries. It's not. I mean, it's really time to act together, to work together, and to build on each and every institution specific strengths, but working more as a system. What does it mean? For me, there are different levels. I mean, I think that we are different institutions. We have our governance, we have our mandate, we have our specificities. But there is a lot of things that we have in common, and on which we can work together to deliver a better impact. Starting working on the complementarities and really on each other's strengths, but also being more efficient when we do some co-financing, and we often do some co-financing, and also have a more consistent approach of how to deal with global challenges. The climate issue is a very illustrative one for me, because I think it's everybody understands how complex it is to implement policies and projects that deliver on climate. You need to have long-term strategy at different sectors, projects, but it's a whole. You are not going to solve the situation with individual projects without a global plan, and if we want to have this global plan, we really need to work together with the country and driven by the country to be able to deliver consistently and something efficiently. And this is also the case. I mean, if we want to bring in the private sector, you need to do it at scale and have this kind of global approach and general strategy. So for me, I believe in, very much support the 5 priorities, but I would like to focus on 2 concrete examples which are very, I think, deliverable in our reach and on which we should make very concrete progress. The first one is country platform. We've been working, it already exists, it's already implemented. We have a very good example with Rania, which is the NUEFE initiative. What worked with NUEFE very much is that country-driven. It was really led by Rania as a Minister of International Cooperation, bringing together the different MDBs, setting the priorities, and then we have a common agenda. We know, what we can do, who will deliver what institution will contribute to what, and I think that's a very efficient, and it's for us, for the country, hopefully, but also for foreign investors, because they have clarity on the strategy, what is coming up, what kind of project, and so forth. And there are different models. We've been doing another type of country platform with North Macedonia. But I think we need flexibility, but some features which are very much, the country-driven, being inclusive, and focus on clear issues and objectives. The second very important element, I think, in concrete terms, where I think we could make rapid progress, is mutual reliance. in particular with institutions which are close to with which we share same level of standards, same principles. And on that, it would be very much for the benefit of the country, of the clients, because it would simplify. We would have one leading institution, and the other will rely on the work done by this leading institution. We are doing bits and pieces already with EIB, with IFC, but I think we can go a step further. Trust, that implies to be trustful, and to trust that the other institution will do as better as we do, and we often tend to believe that we are the best, but we know that we should be able to rely, and so I'm very keen on the progress we are doing in this area. Very thrilled to have signed an MOU with the bank covering, and with the different hats of the bank within IFC, MIGA, and the World Bank group as a whole on what we can do together. And for me, it's something which is a no-brainer in a way. So we need to deliver on that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to come back to some of those points, country platforms in particular, and mutual reliance, and in other questions, but let me go to Axel now. And you referred to the MOU that the deal that the EBRD and the World Bank signed in Washington, as well as the joint declaration that we saw at the beginning. So, Axel, you're responsible. You're co-leading the evolution roadmap of the World Bank Group. How's MDB collaboration factored into this?
First, let me warmly congratulate Odile to her reappointment. This is great news, and it has been also the last couple of years great collaboration. In fact, we go back 30 years when we worked together on Côte d'Ivoire, so this is a while. Actually, before I get to the MOU, what is very important is in the whole evolution roadmap, and I think Odile mentioned that, and the interesting thing what she says is basically what we would say. So I think there is a lot of alignment in the assessment and what we need to do. But I think, we see multilateralism on the threat. We see the SDGs not being delivered. We see the climate challenges. And then ultimately we need to say, what can MDBs provide as a system, as value added? And I think a lot has been done. We have been working together over time. But it is very clear we can do better and we can do more. And apart from that, we have good collaboration. I would say where there is a big change is the mindset. The mindset for internally that the organizations, certainly in the World Bank Group, have to ask, can we actually make a bigger contribution to these challenges, be it the SDGs, be it also on climate? And there you start touching on the financing, you start talking about the organization or effectiveness, you start touching also on the World Bank Group, how we can deliver. And there are always areas where you can improve, so we should not do it as if we are perfect. We can do better. And one of the areas is also then the question about the MDBs. And I think we have a group of MDBs that meet regularly. Now it's under the presidency of the ADB, the Inter-American Development Bank. We changed on. And we have to admit that sometimes these were just meetings. Meetings. And I think what I would say is there is a very determined, I think, change now to say, can we actually identify the areas where we can do better? Now, yeah, we are perfect. Will we get it immediately right? Probably not. But I think you can say there is a resolve to do so. Now, you have then to implement. So you have first the aggregate, can we do better? That is in areas what Odile already was mentioned, mutual reliance, that, for example, on procurement. I think this has to be done within the institutions, among them, but I would also say it is also a challenge to the shareholders, because this is not something, I think actually the institutions are willing to move, but there will be discussions with shareholders. And there, sometimes we'll have to see if that will be done. I think it would be a huge progress, particularly transaction cost would be reduced, particularly for our client countries. But this is an area. In the climate change area, how we can scale better. And it is not only in financing, but on technical systems, but also on measurement. We are measuring now about 12 years climate financing. I would say that is really climate change measurement 101. We now need to go to output measurement. It's much more difficult. Here we have a group together to work on that. We have actually quite a few of this working group, but that is where we need to be far more determined. Same on the co-financing. Co-financing has always existed. Are we at the production frontier? By far, no. So that is the reason why this platform, and I think very basic things are being discussed, how we can actually jointly increase this. And here then we need to give this additional push, and there the MOUs come in between the individual organizations. I think that there is, of course, in the MOU, but with the EBRD, there's a lot of focus, of course, with the IFC and MIGA. I actually would say this should not be limited only on that, because there are also policy-based issues in which basically the World Bank can, through lending operations, also support this, and that is important. The other part is certainly our collaborative work on Ukraine, and here we have been practicing on procurement. So these are areas where we can actually learn from some of our experience. Can we actually scale this up? And I think there is a lot of possibilities on this. I think then there is a whole discussion within with the bank board on this global challenges. We call it global challenges programs. The fact is that the world has become very fragmented, and sometimes we don't have any more the desired impact. Can we actually make bigger impact, for example, in the energy area, electricity to Africa, particularly those who have no access on this? But here we will need to work not only the World Bank, but with all the other development banks. And that can be with the African Development Bank, but also EBRD. And how can we actually complement each other, where one could take more the lead in the private sector, we more on the public sector. But at the end, we have to drive this with ambition. And I think that is where I believe is the biggest potential. Also, what needs to be seen is that it should not be limited just by the presidents that they meet and then say something nice, but basically that we have the working groups working on this, and by working much more closely on that complementarity idea you just mentioned is going to prevail as opposed to the competition element. And I think that is where we need to move together. I really would say from the whole atmospheric, there is a real good chance that we here can succeed. And we need just to stay open that we will make sometimes mistakes. Are we always perfect? No. But I think as long as we stay focused that we want to have an impact together, that is where we have to work towards.
Thank you very much. Really interesting insights from two of the MDBs. We've got two more. But actually, first, let's hear some of the external perspective, because I think that will help to move the conversation forward. And I will start with you, Rania, yes, because obviously you're a very important stakeholder. Your perspective on this point.
Well, thank you very much. And let me first start by also congratulating Odile for her leadership at the institution, but for her personal commitment to all the 5 points that were just put on the screen. Let me say that there's a supply side and a demand side, and the countries represent the demand side. Over time, there has been a lot of talk on MDB collaboration, and we're very happy from the demand side to see it actually being more activated. We see this with teams on the ground trying to work closer with each other. We see it in a way where climate action has created a common denominator for all institutions, because climate is now, an objective for countries, but also all financial institutions have to pitch in and help, be it with the technical advisory or with the financing. So there is currently, from attending the meetings that Axel pointed to, more practicality in terms of finding solutions to actually bring, despite the procurement differences, despite some of the practices and the internal bureaucracies within the institutions, putting those aside, I think that because of the crises that we are all facing and also the timeline with the SDGs and the climate goals, there is more practicality in trying to, rather than look at the theoretical aspects of the institutions, but try to find the solution. So this is something from a country perspective that we are seeing, and I think that the urgency of many of the pointers or the crises around us is pushing all of us to work together. As much as the MDBs need to do more, countries also need to do more of an exercise. One of the points that were on the screen was improving country collaboration or within country cooperation. And I think this is where the concepts of country leadership in trying to specify priorities and identifying the comparative advantage of the different institutions. In our case, the World Bank has worked with us over the years, so we know that the World Bank comes in on many important policy angles that then pave the way for private sector engagement where IFC or EBRD or others can come in. Also, when we take a look at Europe, EU, EIB, EBRD, our French colleagues, our German colleagues, so the concept of Team Europe comes in very vividly. So the practice of improving cooperation, yes, there has to be the commitment from the MDB side, but also the countries need to be receptive to that and provide an enabling environment to push these practices forward. And I think that is also being gained through country-to-country engagement. And that's why with the World Bank evolution, there's a section very important related to triangular cooperation. In EBRD, we're discussing the same with the new countries that are accessing. So I think that we need to look at the positive spots where collaboration in countries have worked, try to scale those. And I think one aspect is there are so many initiatives under each institution. And I just give one example. When everybody's scrambling for financial resources, we look at trust funds. And institutions have so many trust funds, but the knowledge of how they work, what they are there to accomplish, I think that in itself might be the information sharing and I don't want to say transparency because it's not that they're not transparent in terms of the way they work, but I think making them available so that different institutions can work together and tap on these available resources becomes more significant. I may want to also just end by private sector engagement is now so important. It's important because of the job creation that is required. It is important because of the investment angle, but the risks are so high. And the risks are high for obvious reasons. We don't have to go through them. But platforms such as the July 1st MEGA platform that the World Bank is putting up as, again, part of the evolution is going to be so fundamental. The importance of having EBRD, IFC work together jointly on projects in a programmatic approach, as was very clearly identified. All of these are the only ways by which also countries can meet the expectations of the public and have people see the system working together to meet their aspirations of increased employment, more SME engagement, startups which are coming up. So there is among the different MDBs so much experience and technical expertise, but again, not emphasizing competition, which is sometimes good for the countries, because competition means that we might get better terms or we might get faster projects finished. But again, complementarity is key. We have so many examples where the World Bank, EBRD, EIB, and many others work together, and that's the only way that we are able to accelerate. And we need to accelerate today to be able to show countries that are still in the process of moving forward how to actually do it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so last person we haven't heard from so far, Alexia. you represent a shareholder perspective. I think we'd be very keen to know what does success look like in MDB collaboration to you? What is it that you're looking for?
Thank you so much, Richard. And I do think there is, like other panelists have said, a renewed determination and resolve around making collaboration translate into impact. And one of the reasons is leadership. And for that, on that note, I really want to congratulate Odile on her re-election, because I think she shows just the type of leadership that the system needs. So congratulations. So what does success look like? Well, I think we have to be really specific about the goal of collaboration. We're not just doing it to be nice, but it's for a purpose. And I would outline sort of 3 levels of collaboration that are important. The first one is around harmonizing standards, policies, procedures that really can make a difference in terms of reducing transaction costs for countries. So a lot has been said about that, around environmental, social, procurement standards in particular. And I think the question of mutual reliance there truly is not a new one, but one that we can and must do better on. There are challenges. I think, Axel, you mentioned shareholders have their role there as well. And it's true, and I think all of you are familiar with the independent accountability mechanisms. And there are questions if an institution is not using its own standards and a case is brought against the institution, if it didn't follow its standards, what's the governance around that? I think we can answer all those questions, and we must. The second level that I would propose for collaboration is programmatic collaboration, right? So operational collaboration. And there, I think there's a lot of good work being done on country platforms. This has come up already several times. The example from Egypt, which I think was really powerful. I'm looking at the Asian Development Bank here. We have the example with the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which was really a concept around, starting with country ambition. So strong country ambition in terms of their own climate goals, and then really aligning policy work around that ambition, aligning public and private financing around that ambition as well. So we saw, for example, in Indonesia, a $20 billion commitment from the public and private side. So that's a really important example. I think the work that we're also seeing, the World Bank, working with the IDB, for example, to step up collaboration in markets that are smaller, sometimes more difficult to work in, like in the Caribbean, that really matters. We even see the Inter-American Development Bank having a partnership with the Caribbean Development Bank, so a smaller institution in terms of helping it reach its goals. The announcement from the World Bank with the African Development Bank to help really make a big dent on the lack of energy access in Africa is another example. And then the third level I want to sort of bring to the table is the idea of financial innovation, where collective action can make a big difference. And let me share a couple of examples. So there's been a big piece of work done around callable capital and whether the MDBs can derive more value from callable capital. That was a huge collective action exercise where at spring meetings we had 5 MDBs releasing public reports about how they treat callable capital, stress tests that each institution did to show just how unlikely it would be that they would call callable capital. And then many shareholders also transparently, through reporting, showing how they would really stand behind callable capital. The idea being, with all this transparency, that perhaps credit rating agencies would allow MDBs to give more value to callable capital. If only one institution or a few shareholders had moved, it would have no census exercise. So that's just one example. The other is hybrid capital, which I think is something I hope EBRD is also looking at, but having a framework across MDBs for hybrid capital will make it easier for both shareholders, but also the private sector to look at MDBs seriously with this instrument. Lastly, because you touched on the private sector as well, Rania, it's very clear that when we talk to investors, they see an alphabet soup of practices and initiatives that are absolutely confusing to them. And I think the more there can be coherence and aggregation and standardization in terms of what the MDBs do, the more investors of all types will be able to work in a more constructive fashion with the MDBs. Final point. evolution, which we're talking about, and we talked about the World Bank evolution roadmap, is also about shareholders. And so if we talk about MDBs working better as a system, it also means, and it has meant, shareholders of the institutions engaging much more to send coherent, ideally, messages to the institutions about what we want to see them do.
Interesting last point that we might come back to, I think. So we have two more MDBs to hear from, so we'll go back along the panel. And Thomas, maybe we can just turn to you now. That point about common standards, it's come up several times already. I just wonder if you have a response to that. Where do you think we are on that?
Yes, and thank you. And let me start by congratulating Odile. I mean, EBRD is a very close partner to the EIB. We are a shareholder of EBRD, but we are mostly also a partner when we are actually implementing good investments, not least in Western Balkans, where we cooperate very tightly, and here in Armenia with a joint road project. We work in Egypt together. So we are really looking forward to your next term and deepen the cooperation. So when we started EIB Global a number of years ago, that was not the start of financing outside the EU. We've been doing that for many, many decades. But there were ambitions in that restart. And one of them was to strengthen partnerships to be able to increase impact. And I think we are seeing some of the effects of that in our daily work when we have, of course, the cooperation with MDBs is crucial for us, but also with other partners like philanthropic organizations, Gates Foundation, or United Nations organizations like WHO. We have really been putting a lot of effort into those type of partnerships. So that is, I think, a very crucial step to take. And, of course, now we have the momentum of multilateral development banks reforms. This is an excellent opportunity to look at what can we do to deepen our cooperation to the benefit of our clients. Because I think that should be the focus. If we can do more on mutual reliance in the way we work, the main focus should be that the clients feel that it is a much more efficient cooperation, much more impactful. And here I think we can do a lot. It's interesting to see what we did in Ukraine recently on the procurement side, where we actually decided together to go for more of joint cooperation. We can learn from this and expand that to other regions. I'm convinced about that. And with a partner like EBRD, which we work so closely with, we work with all of you, but especially with EBRD, I think we should be ambitious and see how can we go even further when it comes to mutual reliance. We need the support of the shareholders and we need the support of the European Commission. But if we can really take major steps, I think that could be really good for our impact globally. And we are setting that in motion as we speak. There will be a lot of things that people will say that this is not possible, we have legal constraints, but let's put them on the table and see if we are ambitious, what can we really achieve. That is one thing that is important. I'm also in favor very much of the country platform perspective, and Egypt is a very nice example, and you have been leading that very efficiently. And to be able to work together, but with a country leadership and ownership, I think is crucially important. Otherwise, we come as a group of MDBs making it a bit more complicated for the country if they have not themselves the leadership of what to prioritize. We do a couple of things that can be interesting in this perspective also. We are about to launch a broad cooperation on investment in health. We are a health investment impact platform where EIB, together with African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and Asian Development Bank, are working tightly with WHO to identify what type of health investments are the most crucial ones, and together with partner countries, see to that we can really roll that out. Another, I think, promising example to crowd in private capital is we are about to roll out the Global Green Bond Initiative, where the EIB takes the lead as a multilateral development bank together with several multilateral, and EBRD is, of course, part of that, to create a green bond fund. where we go in with equity to de-risk private institutional investors to come in and expand that fund to get more firepower. And then via technical assistance, support countries and institutions with the framework of green bond issuance. And then the fund can take corner positions in the issuance to simplify that. So we get crowding on the fund level via institutional investors, but also on the local level via the bond issuance, because it is a credible and a strong partnership that really delivers. So these kind of things, to make impact more profound, I think we should look for and be creative on.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Bhargav, we haven't heard from you. Your relatively recent arrival to the MDB system at the ADB, I wonder if you just want to pick up on that point about mutual reliance, perhaps, in particular, because that seems to be, I think we've heard that in almost every answer so far. I'd just be interested to know where you stand.
Thank you, and let me also congratulate Odile and thank her for the wonderful hospitality here and for inviting us to this panel. So you're right, I've been in the MDB ecosystem about 4 months. The time is short enough for me not to forget my private sector, experiences, and reasonably long enough to maybe understand the issue at a high level. You put out those 5 agendas that was put out in Marrakesh and subsequently this April. And, in a sense, a reflection of the progress, as I see it, I think that we have made reasonably good progress on the first one, which is a financial capacity. And collectively, for example, as ADB, we've done a CAF, which has increased our lending headroom by about 40%. And there is collaboration that we are seeing in some of the other areas that Alexia also referred to. I think the second area, climate, and coming from Asia, with a summer which has been the hottest in the last 2,000 years, a year where we saw schools being closed down because of heat, we saw recently and freshly built roads melting on their own. We have some of our constituencies who worry not about 1.5 degrees or 2.5 degrees, they worry about their very existence. I think the issue that I see is while we are talking on joint action, I think there is probably an extreme criticality in terms of doing it at a more rapid pace. And so if I now step back, and a lot has been said on what's working and what is not working, but if I step back and look at, kind of frame this as to where we see, intentionality or the, intent in terms of collaborating. If you look at an institutional level, I think all of us are largely aligned. All of us have similar objectives, similar purposes. Maybe there would be some tweaks in terms of our local context, maybe priorities at a point in time, but I don't think there's a big difference in terms of how we are thinking about that. The second is at a country level, and we've had examples of Egypt. We talked about Indonesia, and as ADB we worked on the same approach in Bangladesh, but it's largely driven by the leadership of the country and collectively how we work together. And in that example, we and World Bank collaborated, and it's no longer an ADB or a World Bank initiative, it's a Bangladesh initiative for climate action. And I think that's how it should be, just to create alignment and ownership. The point then is, and I'll come to the next two, but the point then is, why are we talking about only 2 or 3, and what can we do about scaling it up more rapidly? The third level is at a project level or a transaction level. So when you have an agreement at a country level, when you have projects, what do you do? And again, this boils down to how we are measured. What is our success measures? What is our KPIs? If we are all incented to do more lending, then we will behave in a certain manner. If we are incented to do something else, we'll behave in a different manner. And it brings me back to the second point in terms of how do we create a framework so that we can collaborate and create more work for us on the downstream side so that we don't end up competing. And there's no pressure to compete, because I think all of us understand there is a lot to be done. And if we can work well on the upstream side, on the country platform side, we probably will have more shovel-ready projects which drive the possibility of do not force us to end up competing in some of the areas that we do compete. And the fourth is the area that I think all of us have talked about in terms of the operational issues, in terms of policies, in terms of procurement, in terms of standards, monitoring. Again, it boils down to incentives, but disincentives. in terms of what happens if something goes wrong, the point that Axel made. So if I now look at how do we increase the intensity and the speed of execution, which is what we kind of live our life in a private sector, how do we deliver this on a quarterly basis and not with a 5-year mindset because of the criticality of, or the need for us to do this fast? I can think of maybe 3 things. One is the governance, and again that was also alluded to, governance at a shareholder level, but governance at a process level. It's not just about every 6 months the heads of MDBs meeting and discussing this. It is setting down a process across the maybe 10 or 5 or whatever number of MDBs to see how the organization works on this on a regular basis. I mean, in a private sector, if something is urgent, you review it almost every week. And there is complete focus of the organization to make it happen at a rapid pace. So can we think of doing this as a body of MDBs to see that operationally we come together and see how we address some of these issues? Issues I think all of us know and all of us talked about, but how do we address some of these things? The governance and the process to make it happen. The second is knowledge sharing. Again, the point that Alexia made on alphabet soup. Is there some way we can put it all together for the private sector to understand what we mean when we say, ABC? Is there some way of knowledge sharing with, let's say, the Indonesian government or the country partners from Egypt to come and showcase this on a maybe a quarterly basis across MDBs? Create a knowledge sharing platform so that great practices are exchanged, because you can't make this change. You can't boil the ocean. It doesn't happen unless you see good practices being practiced and shared, the knowledge shared across the MDB ecosystem and the country partners, so that people learn from them and see that this is working and maybe get inspired. So knowledge sharing. And third, I would say, is incentives. How we are incentivized will shape how we behave in a certain manner. If we are incentivized for collaboration, we will collaborate a lot more. If we are not, then we will not. So maybe those 3 suggestions and ideas, more from a external perspective as yet. Very soon I'll not have external perspectives.
Thank you. I'm tempted to think that the problem might be that the ocean is boiling, actually. Okay, so we've heard from all 6 of you. It would be helpful if we could have some mutual reliance upon maybe some quick fire answers now, so that we can get through the time that we have. And Odile, I'm going to come back to you. You talked about chemistry, and Axel talked about mindset. And we're hearing a lot of agreement about kind of what the issue is here. What changes it from mindset to action?
No, I mean, the mindset is very important, and the willingness, and I think the commitment of the leaders of the MDBs to do something together and to really deliver on the agenda, it's I think, very important. It's also reverse a bit, and I think that there was an interesting dynamic between the G20 and MDB's leaders, because we had a succession of starting with a CAF report, of a report from external experts of how MDBs could, what they should do with their balance sheet and so forth, and this triggered really, at the beginning, a bit of skepticism from MDB, saying, well, we know very well how we manage our balance sheet, and then a new expert report and so forth. But then a realization that we could learn from each other, because some things we were doing were not done in other institutions, and that was really a sort of day-to-day discussion among CFOs, among CROs, about, what are you doing on hybrid? How the discussion on SDR allocation is going? What can we learn from that? And this is not something it's not a process you organize, and it's triggered by a process, but then it becomes really a sort of collaborative relationship because we have the same challenges, we have a lot of same shareholders, and really learning from each other and gaining a lot of time by relying on each other's experience. And so I think that's a very important new element, which is, and we need to keep this momentum, and having MOUs and this high-level objective is an important dimension of it, but then the delivering will be important. What it changed also, it's the first time I think MDBs themselves provided a report under the leadership of the ADB. We put forward, we wrote a sort of our viewpoint on what will be our priorities working together in the next month. So not only being at the receiving end of what shareholders want and so forth, but also from our building on our expertise, our know-how, and our responsibilities, putting on the agenda ourselves some important issues. There were one issue which was discussed, which in my view is very important, is everything related to common terminology, a lot of the work we do needs to be reported externally. Impact will be much more important and so on, but how do we define that? How do we measure that? There has always been a lot of work on green methodology. What do you consider as private sector mobilization, definition, and so forth? But I think this is even more important now because it's also a question of accountability and the transparency between MDBs and with the external stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to Thomas, and then I'm going to come to you, Axel, actually. So just on it was related to the same question that I asked Odile. Obviously, you have new leadership as well, and that's often a moment at which things change and that there's greater momentum. Is that the intention of EIB?
Absolutely, and it's a great opportunity because it really creates the limelight is on what we do and what can we do better. And this is exactly what we are working with now, with an 8-point program that the President is launching together with the shareholders, where we, of course, will have as our first and main focus point is to be the climate bank also in the future. That is very important. We took that stance a number of years ago. We think that is extremely important, and that means, for instance, that we already 4 or 5 years ago stopped financing gas, coal and oil-related energy and concentrate fully on renewable energy, energy efficiency in grids. And this is going to be the line also going forward. We think that thereby we put additionality on the table, but we also concentrate the resources on where we think it is most impactful in the longer run. Talking about partnerships, and one interesting thing is that also International Monetary Fund has started with their RSF facility, the ability to lend long-term to partner countries for climate reasons. And we have been partnering up together with other MDBs and national development banks with the International Monetary Fund, for instance, in Rwanda, to sort of leverage those resources via our knowledge on how to do it in a bankable way to increase the impact of climate investments. Barbados, we do a debt for climate swap. That can also be a way of working to get more impact for the scarce resources that we have.
Thank you. Axel, I want to go back to something that, a theme that both you and Alexia mentioned, which was shareholders. Alexia talked about shareholder coherence, and you talked about the shareholder challenge. Tell me more about what you see that challenge is and how you address it.
That's a big one. Look, I think there is... it's a very important question about the relevance or irrelevance of multilateral institutions. And that is the question that how does that affect shareholding? And if we don't keep this in mind, we are going to have the link, and there's a problem. Now, you hear a lot about shareholding, and people like to focus on the Bretton Woods, World Bank. So, well, you need to change all this, and probably you need a discussion. But I actually did myself a little bit of an analysis since 1946. And what you are seeing is that the World Bank is the only organization that has had the most significant changes in shareholding against general perception. In 1946, the 2 largest shareholders had 52% of the votes. Today, it's around around 21%. It's almost 60%. In IDA, the largest contributor gave up 2/3 of its voting power. 2/3. So I think that is sometimes completely forgotten in this whole discussion. And so I think we need to look at this clearly. In the case of the World Bank, you cannot discuss EBRD shareholding without looking at IDA, our concessional arm. And why is that? Because the OECD countries largely provided 97% of the funding for that fund. And you will be maybe surprised when you think about this, who's giving what to the World Bank. In the case of the EBRD capital, it's maybe $22 billion. In IDA, $320 billion. $320 billion. You cannot completely ignore that, because that is where taxpayer dollars are being voted, and it is focused on the poorest countries. So it's very, very important. But in this context also of, this is shareholder, but here is also concessional resources which you have to consider. Where I would agree is where we have more discussion needed is what Rania was mentioned about trust fund, and I would say the financial intermediary funds. The financial intermediaries is like the green climate funds, the JAFs, the global fund, etc. The interesting thing is that the international community has provided to these funds about $45 billion in grants. And so the question I would have is this effective? Because a dollar in is a dollar out. Now the MDBs have one big advantage. They are leveraging machines. So the question is, and then probably here is also about climate change, is you need sometimes also blended financing. And I'm not talking about the low-income countries. That is being covered largely by IDA and other funds. But for the middle-income countries, there is little available. Now, if you were to more smartly combine that with the leveraging ability, and I'm not talking on the World Bank, all the others, then you could have, if you had done that, you could have probably made out of the 45 billion, probably a proposition of 100 billion or so. And that, I think, the shareholders and the donors have to provide how you more smartly combine multilateral resources in a resource-constrained environment and taking advantage of the leveraging abilities of this organization. That is an important discussion, and I think there is far more room than meets the eye, and it is not being really discussed. There are sensitive issues because everybody has their interest, but I think that is where I would push very, very hard.
Okay. Thank you. I might just go straight back to Alexia, actually, for a response on that, and whether you want to expand on your point about coherence as well.
No, sure. And actually, maybe I'll build on the specific example that Axel was discussing as one example of shareholder coherence. So I think a lot of shareholders have long prioritized the use of grant funding and the most concessional funding for low-income countries, for the poorest countries. Certainly that's been the case of the United States. With the challenge of climate change, for example, that we all are too keenly aware of, and you just reminded us some of the examples from Asia and the Pacific Islands where it is indeed existential, there is a question mark about whether for countries to address these global regional challenges like climate, but also fragility and conflict pandemics, there's a need for them to sometimes also access more concessional funding. So at the World Bank, there was, I think it's fair to say, a very difficult discussion amongst shareholders around something that's called the Financial Incentives Framework, which tried to create rules and principles for the use of concessionality, which could be in terms of longer tenures as well as lower pricing, but also more volume, so incentives, for IBRD countries. And it was a very difficult conversation because shareholders came at this from very different perspectives. So some borrowing countries was like, yes, just give us a lot of concessionality. The U.S. was like, oh, but concessionality by definition, the scarcest funding will always be scarce, grants. And so if we don't want to take money away from low-income countries, but recognize now that middle-income countries, for certain types of projects that have cross-border impacts, need that concessionality, how do we define the principles around that? Really difficult conversation, but we got there. And that's an example of what I mean about shareholder coherence. And again, I want to really underscore, when we say shareholders, I'm a shareholder, you're a shareholder. So it's, across, borrowing countries, but also non-borrowing countries. So I think that's just one very specific example. I think the other one, and I know that you wanted to talk about private sector, at one point, and I do think that thinking through how we leverage the expertise, the policy work, and the balance sheet of MDBs to be able to mobilize in private capital is another area that requires both some collective action by the MDBs and some shareholder consistency in terms of what do we mean by risk appetite. We throw those words around so much, but what does that actually mean? I think there's a bit of work to do across the system because there's risk capital, which is one thing. There's innovation and risk-taking for the purpose of innovation, which is another element. And so I think we need to be much more clear about that. And then I think, Odile, your point on definitions is also really important. And I want to commend the EBRD for being one of the MDBs that does have a target around capital mobilization. But I think we need more transparency about what we're actually doing. And my sense is we need clear targets around mobilization that's purely private sector, because there's all kinds of different mobilization, including of members of the system, but actually purely private sector. And then I think we also need a target that's actually, so that's more narrow. And then I think we need a broader target, what the World Bank sometimes talks, or the IFC, about private sector enabling, because the reality is you need a suite of interventions to bring in the private sector, including policy work, the upstream work. And so capturing both the more narrow, pure public, broader policy upstream and midstream work is another area that could benefit from, I think, more joint work.
Okay, thank you. So just to be clear, I think we're going to run over our time. I hope you don't mind, but this conversation's really good and it would feel strange to finish it in the next 5 minutes. I'm going to in a moment, I'll come to you, Rania, on country platforms again. I want to come back to that. But just on the point about private sector, Bhargav, I don't know if you mind me coming back to you on this one, because this, obviously, EBRD has a very big private sector focus. It's a large majority of what we do. The ADB is reorganizing in ways to enable more private sector focus in your organization. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the 4 pillars of our new operating model, one of them is private sector. On climate, we've put out a pretty large objective of $100 billion of our own balance sheet from 2019 to 2030. But we've also talked about the private sector shift, which includes the one that Alexia referred to in terms of the upstream work. And my sense is that that is an area that we need to work together, as I said earlier. But coming back to the larger point that was made in terms of how do we mobilize more private sector, I think from ADB's perspective, our private sector operation has to scale up, and there's again a lot of collaboration, learning that we can have, and we use this opportunity to be here to meet colleagues in EBRD to see how we can collaborate on that today and yesterday, and I'm very keen to see how we can scale up private sector. But if I just step back and think about the private sector, thought process, if you look at the pure private sector that we can mobilize through. One is the insurance sector, which I think all of us use in some ways or form from a risk participation perspective. Second is the banking market. And the third is capital market. On the banking market, the reason I made the point earlier is of getting the Basel and the central banks involved in the process is how do we look at the capital relief that they get if they work with us? Because if you look at the incentive for commercial banks to lend for longer term is very low, simply because of the capital charge that they have and their ALM issues. So can we solve that through guarantees or other risk participation solutions where we come in, provide that, but then they need the right level of relief. The second is, if not at the time of origination, where you do the syndication through this process, can we build more capacity on the asset market in terms of selling securitization, selling down subsequently? Again, some of the MDBs have done a better job. Then I think we could collaborate a lot more to figure out what's the best market. And the capital markets has more risk appetite for longer term. There are different providers of that capital. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is looking at a project. What are the type of risks and who are the best partners to absorb that risk. And that could be very different, sets of players than the conventional players that we usually think about.
Okay, thank you. As I said, country platforms, just a bit of advance warning, we'll run out of time fairly soon, and what I'd like to do is one further round of questions for everybody, something along the lines of, in 12 months' time, if we come back, what should we be seeing with all the things we've discussed? But I'll give you time to think about that question. So, but on the country platforms, I've got a very specific question, Rania, which is that, and it relates back to what you said earlier, that we talk a lot in our system about the need for country platforms, but country platforms only work if countries want them, don't they? And what's your experience? What is it that makes countries, you have one, what is it that makes countries want them, and what do we need to be listening to?
Before I answer that, can I do some reflections?
Yes, of course. Please do. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first, because Axel mentioned IDA countries. Egypt was an IDA country. We graduated, and now we're contributing to IDA. So the policy work that happens with the MDBs is so important for countries. It's not just nice reports or so forth. It's very deep engagement. It's engagement with different types of ministries over time. It's trust that you build. So there is a process, and you can go from a low-income country to a middle-income country, and that's why the experience sharing and the knowledge sharing, and even when the World Bank was going through the evolution, hearing the different shareholders is very, very important. So that's one key point. The second is the IMF was mentioned with its SDRs, and SDRs, I think there was an agreement a few days ago on also African Development Bank being able to leverage that, so that's going to also help quite a bit, particularly for the private sector engagement element. And then the third point was the RSF, as well as some of the very important work that the bank does, such as the climate country development reports, are inputs into what the IMF does. So there is, for the very first time, as I mentioned, very clear, practical coordination elements between the different institutions, and that is extremely refreshing. And the discussion we're having today is very different than a discussion we had maybe 12 months ago or 18 months ago. So this is progress. I know not everybody has attended previous or has been serial attendees of such discussions, but no, there is a very refreshing element related to that. And then just on the definitions and what tools are available to the private sector, given that we are very fond of platforms, we created another platform to inform the private sector in Egypt about all the tools available from the bilateral and the multilateral institutions. And we called it the Hub for Advisory, Finance and Investment for Enterprises. In Arabic, it's called Hafiz. Hafiz means incentivize. So it's a way to create that knowledge and try to overcome the knowledge gap. Going back to the platforms point, and I really hope that whether through the World Bank, this is a call that we've made as a shareholder, and with EBRD today as well, that we need to institutionalize a little bit more how we actually do triangular cooperation so that the examples can be and as ADB, we're not a member of the ADB, but how these examples can actually be showcased. The country platform, we hosted COP27 in 2022, and it was an opportunity for the government to translate a lot of the climate ambitions into projects which then can benefit from the different pools of concessional finance, including the grants and including some of the blended elements that have been discussed among different financial institutions. And we wanted to be a JETP, but we could not because of the construction of the JETP, focusing on mitigation and focusing on decommissioning coal plants particularly, and also because water and food or adaptation is important for countries such as Egypt. And that's where tailoring a country-led platform was important for us, and it was important to showcase other countries. The key pillars of doing this properly or successfully, since it was mentioned as successful by many of those on the panels and over the past 2 years, first there's the commitment of the government to move ahead with climate ambition, be clear with the NDCs, and part of the country platform was to bring forward the NDC on the energy mix. So that's one, the commitment. Second is the clarity on the project. So very clear project. It's a programmatic approach. It's not one project versus the other. And number three, the credibility that we have with everybody, and that we've worked with EBRD on so many projects, with IFC on so many projects, with our bilateral colleagues, with EIB, etc. So credibility that was there, and trying to leverage on the comparative advantage, putting away the competition or using the positive element of competition. And once the platform was announced, we had so many others who wanted to join. So if I were with any country, my counterpart, Minister of International Cooperation, I would say you would need to advocate within government that there are pockets of concessional finance, that climate action is on the top of all institutional agendas today. So try and get colleagues in cabinet with their priority projects very clear. Number two is to talk to the, do some PR among institutions to basically show what the objectives and the priorities of the government are, and then have very clear, transparent discussions, and then finally report on your progress. Because if we don't report, then it becomes just MOUs that are signed. But what we did a year after we launched it is to have a progress report very clear on each and every pillar, each and every partner, what was provided, what is a grant component, what is concessional, how much private sector came in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I saw everybody nodding there on the reporting point. We talked about impact, we talked about measurement. I mean, clearly it's a very strong theme of all of this. Okay, so we're going to do some closing thoughts now, just before we finish. And as I said, a way of testing this, if we were sitting here again in 12 months' time, which I hope we might be, in London, what would the report card say, actually, about how far we've got? Odile, do you want to start with that? Here.
Hopefully, I think that we would have more country platform, and the point Rania made about it's also a tool for internal coordination, intra-ministerial coordination, because then it forces the coordination. So I think that's, for me, more country platform would be a big success. Mutual reliance with some institution, and there I want to just insist on the shareholders also need to be aligned, and beyond the global picture on the concrete, what it means concretely, and the question of accepting to trust another institution. And I think that's a key element, because some of the challenge sometimes we see is same project, very concrete project, same project having different feedback from different boards, which are more or less the same. And this is something which I think is a challenge in terms of credibility for all institutions, for us as working on project, but also for the shareholders. So I think if we manage to move on these two very important issues, and the definition on the mobilization, to start with a very concrete example of the work we have to do, we do not define private sector in the same way in IFC, EBRD, ADB. For us, some projects are in the public sector because it's state-owned enterprise, sub-sovereign, it's private sector in IFC and ADB with all the consequences. So this is very basic, but starting with very concrete things, I think it would be the way to deliver also impact in the reality.
Okay, thank you. Axel.
Well, I will be missed not to say that in 12 months' time, we need not to forget the poorest countries. So we need a very successful IDA, because whatever you do, I think we are one world, and still they are in need. So that is very, very important. Second thing is, I think the numbers have come up. We need to standardize. And actually, this is not coming only out of our discussions with the MDBs. Ajay Banga organized also a private sector investment lab with 15 CEOs. What is coming out of this is sometimes they say, look, it's getting confusing. So it's getting confusing with us, certainly with the whole MDB family. They have no clue anymore what is what. So we will need to standardize far more and make it simplified. And that has to be across. That is, I think, is something which goes beyond our external collaboration, but also internally make it much more accessible. And that is our common challenge. I think there also we need shareholders on this, but I think also we together will need to bring this down. But you don't do that for the sake of standardization. I think we need to have some results on this, be it the launching of this guarantee platform. Our ambition is to triple guarantees to 20 billion. So we'll have to make progress on this. I think it would be great to do that also with other organizations. And then also the co-financing need to be much more substantial, and that is also our collaboration among this. So I think there is a lot of concrete work on how we do mobilization. I think that on the mobilization, I think we need to be more honest. I think mobilization should be limited to real, pure mobilization of the private sector. What I am seeing, and we are this. So we are not better, so I just don't want to... But we count each other. And I think it's a joke. So every time I mobilize the EBRD, well, what is that? And the EBRD mobilized the World Bank. And what we do is we hurt each other. Because basically we need to have much more money mobilized of the pure private sector. So I think we need to stop some of these practices and really focus on that, because that is, I think, what is going to be needed. But I think where we are right now in terms of resolve, I think we are getting in a good place, and we will need now to really put more energy and urgency behind it. And I think we will make progress.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going on the line now. Bhargav.
Thanks. So beyond the ideas, I think a couple of things. One, as ADB, our private sector focus is relatively recent in terms of a strategic agenda. So clearly articulated objective, as we did for climate. I think as an organization, we're really bold about putting out a very large objective on the climate side. A similar agenda on the private side, and to me, part of that is collaboration, learning from each other, and seeing how well we can do it together. So entire private sector, including the mobilization aspect. Second is pick up one of these, operational aspects. Is it standards? Is it procurement? Is it accepting each other's credit evaluation? And say, okay, this is something that we ironed out, and this is something that we have all agreed that will be a common standard for all of us. I mean, this is with the private sector lens that I'm talking about. To me, if we can get these two things, I think it will be progress.
Excellent. Thank you. Thomas?
Thanks. I agree very much with my colleagues. Let me just focus on one country to really show the importance of cooperation between the MDBs, and that is Ukraine. Under tremendous pressure, the government, of course, all institutions, all authorities, they have, of course, a strong strategy themselves on how to develop the country under constant bombardment from Russia. And they need a coordinated approach from MDBs to be able to handle the situation as it is. I mean, it's an EU candidate country. We will be there for the long haul, but they are in desperate need of action right now. And having been blown out now, a large part of their energy production system in recent months, they are heading towards a cold winter. So here we are really cooperating very well. We are coordinating. And I think that will give spillover effects also in other cases, because here we are really in an acute situation where we need to cooperate and see to that we have best possible impact.
Okay. Thank you.
I would just, add trying to institutionalize this triangular cooperation by next year, so that maybe, the same way we have donor platforms, we have triangular platforms where we can do more discussions, definitely on IDA. And then finally, maybe a little bit more outreach on the different pockets of financing within the institutions that may not be as obvious as others, particularly on the trust funds.
Thank you. So as a shareholder that has, I'm sure with lots of affection, often been called an activist shareholder, I have lots of thoughts, but I will be brief in the interest of time and say first, really actually agree with everything that's been said previously in terms of priorities for the next 12 months. We'll add three things to the conversation. Number one is, and I think, Rania, you've said it, more platforms, and I think specifically in the energy space, We have a lot of country demand. As you said, the JETPs, I think, is not a model that could be scaled up sufficiently. And so we've been working with climate leads around the MDBs to sort of define a new energy platform model that could be available for many more countries. So hopefully several of those on its way 12 months from now. Secondly, Axel mentioned the climate trust funds. There are many of them, the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, et cetera. With the G20 Brazilian presidency, there's a review of those funds happening now with the goal of easing access to finance. And again, to existing finance, making existing finance work better for countries, work with MDBs better for that leverage. And so 12 months from now, the report will not only be done, but we will be acting on recommendations of the report in a way that countries can actually see the difference. And then since we're at the EBRD annual meetings, my last thought will be linked to EBRD. There's a beautiful, fresh opportunity to deliver on everything we've been discussing, which is with regards to EBRD's expansion to 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and to Iraq, to start from the very beginning as newcomers in these markets to truly embed collaboration with other MDBs that are there already to understand where and how you add value. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're out of time. Been a really fantastic discussion, and I thank our panelists very, very much indeed for, I think we've taken things forward, which is what you would always hope for. So we've heard about the challenges, we've heard about the intent, which is very strong. I think the point about incentives was a good one as well, and once again, Egypt has come up with an acronym that we're all going to be using at some point in the future, I suspect. So that brings this event to an end. There's more events. You can check our online schedule to see what we've got coming up for the rest of today before the event closes. Whether you've been watching on the live stream or in the room, thank you for your attendance. And I should also just say thank you to the production team for making this work so smoothly. So thank you very much, everyone.